Now, I am sure it may seem inconceivable to you, but the fact is that this I amness is retained even though it may, figuratively speaking, now merge with and travel through other such energy fields. There is, in other words, a give and a take between souls or entities, and no end of possibilities, both of development and expansion. Again, the soul is not a closed system. It is only because your present existence is so highly focused in one narrow area that you put such stern limits upon your definitions and the self, and then project these upon your concepts of the soul. You worry for your physical identity, and limit the extent of your perceptions for fear you cannot handle more and retain your selfhood. The soul is not frightened for its identity. It is sure of itself. It ever seeks. It is not afraid of being overwhelmed by experience or perception. If you had a more thorough understanding of the nature of identity, you would not, for example, fear telepathy, for behind this concern is the worry that your identity will be swept away by the suggestions or thoughts of others. No psychological system is closed. No consciousness is closed, regardless of any appearance to the contrary within your own system. The soul is a traveler, as it has been said so often, but it is also the creator of all experience and of all destinations in your terms. It creates worlds as it goes, so to speak. Now this is the true nature of the psychological being of which you are part. As mentioned earlier, later in the book I will give you some practical suggestions that will allow you to recognize some of your own deeper abilities and utilize them for your own development, pleasure, and education. Consciousness is not basically built upon these precepts of good and evil that so presently concern you. By inference, neither is a soul. This does not mean that in your system and in some others, these problems do not exist, and that good is not preferable to the evil. It simply means that the soul knows that good and evil are but different manifestations of a far greater reality. I want to emphasize again that while all this sounds difficult in the telling, it becomes much more clear intuitively when you learn to experience what you are. For if you cannot travel inside your physical body to find your identity, you can travel through your psychological self. There are far more wonders to perceive through this inner exploration than you can possibly believe until you begin such a journey for yourself. You are a soul. You are a particular manifestation of a soul, and it is sheer nonsense to think that you must remain ignorant of the nature of your own being. You may not be able to put your knowledge clearly into words, but this will in no way negate the value of the validity of the experience that will be yours once you begin to look inward. Now you may call this a spiritual or psychological or psychic exploration as you prefer. You will not be trying to find your soul. In that respect there is nothing to find. It is not lost, and you are not lost. The words you may use may make no difference, but your intent does indeed. And now, that concludes that chapter, and I'm going to chapter 7. The potentials of the soul. It seems to you that you have only one form, the physical one that you perceive, and no other. It also seems that your form can only be in one place at one time. You have indeed other forms that you do not perceive, and you also create various kinds of forms for various purposes, although you do not perceive these physically either. Your main sense of identity is involved with your physical body, so that it is, for example, extremely difficult for you to imagine yourself without it, or outside it, or in any way disconnected from it. Form is the result of concentrated energy, the pattern for it caused by vividly directed emotional or psychic ideal images. The intensity is all important. If you have, for example, a highly vivid desire to be somewhere else, then without realizing it consciously, a pseudo-physical form identical with your own may appear in that very spot. The desire will carry the imprint of your personality and image even though you may remain unaware of the image or its appearance in the other location. Though this thought image usually is not seen by others, it is quite possible that in the future scientific instruments may perceive it. As it is, such an image may be perceived by those who have developed use of the inner senses. An intense mental act, thought, or emotion will not only be constructed in some physical or pseudo-physical manner, but will also bear to some extent the imprint of the personality who originally conceived it. There are many such incipient or latent forms. To help you imagine what I am speaking of, you might think in terms of ghost images or shadow images, though this is only for the sake of analogy. Forms, for example, just beneath that have not emerged completely into physical reality as you know it, but are nevertheless vivid enough to be constructed. You would think them quite real indeed if you could see them. Each individual actually sends such replica images of himself out frequently, though the degree of the materialization may differ, some forms, for example, being more or less shadowy than others. However, these forms are not mere projections, flat images. They have a definite effect upon the atmosphere. They make room for themselves in ways that are rather difficult to explain, although they may coexist at times with physical objects or shapes, or may even be superimposed upon these. In this case, there is a definite interaction, an interchange that is, again, beneath physical perception. You may suddenly, strongly wish that you were standing by a beloved, but distant, familiar seashore, for example. Oh, wait a minute. You may suddenly, strongly wish that you were standing by a beloved, but distant, familiar seashore, for example. This intense desire would then act something like a core of energy projected outward from your own mind, given a form, your form. The place that you had envisioned would then attract the form, and it would instantaneously stand there. This happens with great frequency. It would not be seen under usual circumstances. On the other hand, if the desire were still more intense, the energy core would be greater, and a portion of your own flow of consciousness would be imparted to the form, so that for a moment you in your room might suddenly smell the salt air, or in some other way perceive the environment in which this pseudo image stands. The extent of perception will vary here to a great degree. To begin with, your physical form is the result of great emotional focus. The fantastic energy of your psyche not only created your physical body, but maintains it. It is not one continuous thing, although to you it seems permanent enough while it lasts. It is, nevertheless, in a constant state of pulsation. And because of the nature of energy and its construction, the body is actually blinking off and on. This is difficult to explain, and for our present purposes it is not entirely necessary that you understand the reasons for this pulsing. But even physically, you are not here as often as you are. Your emotional intensity and focus creates forms besides your physical body. However, their duration and degree are dependent upon the intensity of any given emotional origin. Your space is therefore filled with incipient forms, quite vivid, but beneath the regular structure of matter that you perceive. These projections, then, actually are sent out constantly. Some more sophisticated scientific instruments than you now have would clearly show not only the existence of these forms, but also vibrations in varying waves of intensity surrounding these physical objects that you do perceive. To make this clearer, look at any table in the room before you. It is physical, solid, and you perceive it easily. Now for an analogy. Imagine, if you can, that behind the table is another just like it, but not quite as physical. And behind that one another, and another behind each one more difficult to perceive, fading into invisibility. And in front of the table is a table just like it, only a bit less physical, appearing